Sanjeeva, during his opening keynote yesterday, gave us a little bit of a heads up on what's coming up. So we have Isabel Moni. Isabel is Chief Developer Advocate at WSO2. She has nearly 3 decades of experience in the tech industry, and she's played key roles in pioneering cloud computing, microservices, and Kubernetes during a stint at IBM before. So in her session today, Isabel will explore how to reduce friction that developers face in their workflows. So please join me in welcoming Isabel Moni.
Good morning, bonjour, buenos días a todos. Before I start, I don't know if people who are not from Spain will not know this, but today is Father's Day in Spain. So, feliz Día del Padre a todos los papis que están en la sala para empezar. Okay, so we're here to talk about, so I had the nice Streamlining developer workflow title, but Sanjeeva renamed that to Developer Love, so now I had to use that title. Before I start, I'm going to start with a little story from my previous life. So as I said, I rejoined WSO2 about 7 months ago now, 6 months ago. Time flies. And before that, I was in an API security company. And I'm going to tell you a story about a POC I did at a very large company, financial company, where we deployed our product, which was a security product. And the customer insisted that we deployed our POC in the pre-production environment, which is maybe not the best idea, looking in retrospective. But we deployed our solution, which they were focusing on JSON Web Tokens validation, right? So they just wanted to make sure that when we were validating JSON Web Tokens, they were doing it in the right way. Okay, so far so good. So we deploy this thing, and about something like 15, 20 minutes in after deploying it and putting it on, the ops guys starting to be flooded by requests that their applications don't work anymore. Now you can all agree, I guess, like from a startup perspective, starting a POC where production is being stopped is not the best way to get started, right? But the question is, why did that happen, right? And suddenly there's like all those notes flying around between the ops guys, the security guys, the development guys, and we end up in a meeting like this, right? Where people are like pointing fingers at each other saying, what happened? What did you guys do? Us. Well, the only thing we did was validating that the JSON Web Token, so we had implemented something, I don't know if you've done it maybe, it's called last mile security. It's a way to make sure that whatever call is getting to a backend has actually gone through an API gateway before. So what they do is that the API gateway level, they will generate a new token that will pass on to the backends, and the backends have to validate that just to make sure that the calls actually went through the API gateway. And that was the token we were validating, right? So what happened here was that, for a reason I'm going to explain now, the internal applications team had circumvented the API gateway, and we're going straight to the backends without going through the gateway. But because we were doing like strong validation, they couldn't do that anymore, so all their application starts failing, right? They can't use it anymore. So we have this happening, this meeting, we're in the middle counting points between development and security and operations. And suddenly the development manager says, after all, guys, we were just trying to do our job. And that stuck with me. So why did they felt the need to circumvent the entire system and not go through the API gateway, you would say? Well, the main reason was that customer had a 58, right? 58 steps pipeline that you had to go through to publish something to the API gateway, right? And it was a manual starting thing. So what you had to do was opening a ticket, somebody will receive it, they will look at your code manually, right? And then they would decide themselves that they would start the process to deploy to the gateway or not. And then there will be 58 steps. This is where we need a little bit more love, right? So that's what I'm going to explain now. Now, in that meeting, what came out very clear is, in the end, everyone was actually just trying to do their job. That's the main problem, right? From an ops and security point of view, what do they need? Well, they want coherency. Like, you cannot just go, like, I know microservices has given us the way we can theoretically, right, all do little microservices in whichever development language we want, and nobody cares because you expose an API and you can call it. So I can write it in COBOL and Sanjiva in Ballerina and Frank in Go, and that's all fine, right? So in theory, that works. Now in practice, you know, you're all enterprise customers here, you have to put certain limits, right? Because you need some coherency in your approach to doing things. So you cannot just allow people to randomly pick up what they're going to use as a programming language, right? They want compliance. We all have compliance requirements here. It could be security compliance. It could be because you're working in healthcare or in financial, etc. So they need to put some rules in place, some quality of rules, some management. So, and of course, you have to operate all of this in a coherent way as well. So that's their requirement. They need to have some barriers and those validations in place because that's the way they do their jobs, right? But on the other hand, the developers, well, what does developer do? Well, they have to deliver applications. And in general, they have to do it for yesterday, not for tomorrow. There's a very big business pressure to deliver as fast as possible, right? But they have to they want to stay focused. So that's one of the things, is like asking developers to go and find information in many different random places is very, detrimental to their productivity, right? And autonomy, that's the other thing that came out of that POC experience, is that there was no autonomy from the developers, because every time they wanted to do something, they had to open those tickets and wait for somebody to catch them up. And maybe it would be 3 hours or it would be 4 days. So if they needed a database to be set up to test their things, whatever they wanted to do, it was all like barriers in front of them, right? So that's the key thing, is like that self-service autonomy was really what they were missing, right? So that's what happened there. Now, if you want to develop an application today and actually have simplified this picture, believe it or not, you're not supposed to read all of this. Whenever you see a little orange block, those are building blocks of our own. You heard about Choreo, our development platform. That's part of the things that we're actually using in there, right? So in terms of learning, like the landscape of what developers have to go through to create an application and make it happen is very complicated. Like, you want to deploy on Kubernetes, when you have to learn Kubernetes. And if you're learning Kubernetes, then you probably have to learn Helm on how to deploy on that environment. And then you have to learn, how to create certificates with the set manager. So you keep learning and learning and learning, and this is changing every day. It's that flow and that river that Sanjiva was talking about yesterday. That river never stops. There's like new things popping up every 5 minutes. So that takes us to what we call cognitive overloads. Like, basically, your brain can't take it anymore, right? That's like so difficult. You have so much thing to learn and to catch up with that you actually cannot do your core job, which again, as a developer, is to write code and deliver applications, right? Now, what do you think that number is? Just a guess, anybody in the room? 1 hour. What do developers do for 1 hour a day?
Drink coffee.
What do you say?
Drink coffee.
Drink coffee? No. Well, maybe. Okay. See, code, right? Code. That's what you do. 8 hours a day. If you work 8 hours a day, right? There's a recent study back end of last year that basically said, well, with all the other things a developer has to do, they pretty much spend like focused 1 hour a day writing code, right? The rest, what do they do the rest of the day? Well, maybe they drink some coffee, I agree with you. They have to go to lunch or something. But most of it is fixing stuff. So you write some code, then you have to maintain it. You have to fix, there are some problems open, etc. Learning stuff. You have to go to meetings, so getting interrupted all the time. So My question is, how do we make the most of that hour? Let's say it's even 2 hours a day. That's still quite not so much. Okay, so now let me tell you another story, but which is like the counter of the first one I told. This is a customer I met about 2 years ago that really did a lot of work to entirely automate the process to create and new applications for their developers, right? Now, mind you, this is a almost 3 years effort. Right? It's one of the reasons we say start with maybe our developer portal in Choreo before you jump into doing this. It is a lot of work to build this, but this is the end game, right? The idea is a very large company again, 500 developers in-house, some of them are outsourced, which is another problem. How do you keep coherency when people are not even working for you? They're like remote somewhere and working not inside the company, right? 4 languages, they stop there at 4, right? They want to allow their developers to develop in like 4 different languages, right? So if you have to create a new application, what do? Well, you fill a little form, very simple. I've seen it, like 3 fields. Like what is the type of application you want to build? What is the language that you're going to use? That's pretty much it, like 3 fields, right? Push on a button. This will go and start some, in their case, GitHub Actions. That's what you have that like a pipeline, right? And in that pipeline, they're going to generate entirely the structure of the project. They're going to import all the libraries that you need to work with, that you must work with. Back to compliance, right? You want to make sure people use a certain type of library instead of others. So all of that is done for them. They create a GitHub repo. They populate that with like all the structure that they want in terms of documentation, in terms of all the requirements that are across the company. They create everything required to deploy that, in their case, in Kubernetes, and they push that code and an automatic build happens. So you have a first like Hello World style version of an application running, and then you receive a little mail that says, that's it, this is done. And in general, this takes like 10 minutes, right? So you send that form, it creates the thing, it makes a build, 10 minutes later, you get your little mail, and now you can start working on your application, and you're doing it, and you just have to focus on the code, right? That platform, behind the scenes, all the, the iceberg, which is like the tip of the iceberg. Behind this is like the entire platform. The platform is also like taking care of all this infrastructure, of all the policies from a security, from a compliance point of view, from a network point of view. And if they want to change that, well, that's very easy. It's a central place, and they can actually do that, right? So how do they do this, right? They choose an approach to go API first. What does that mean? That means that we are going to start by defining what an API should do, what the contract should be, right? This is something like more and more people do now, because it's also allowing us to develop this contract that both the consumers of the contract and the providers of the contract have actually agreed on, okay? If you deploy and if you create that contract, then you can start very early in the life cycle doing analysis of that contract, of the data which is being used. Is it well defined, etc.? Is it following, again, the compliance and the rules of the company? And give back that information very early in the life cycle. That's another big problem for developers, is discovering problems very late in the life cycle. The more late, the later you you find a problem, the more complicated and costly it will be to fix that problem, right? If I discover in pre-production that I have some compliance issues and that I don't follow some security rules, whatever it was, it's going to take me like maybe a week to change, when if you're telling me when I'm starting to write the code, then it will be minutes or hours, right? It will be much easier. Allows you to do some mocks, so I can start like mocking the environment. I can start generating tests out of this. So it has a lot of benefits, right? Now, where do I develop all this? That's another thing. We talked about focus. We talked about keeping people focused on their task, right? I've seen a study like recently that if you're focused on a task and you're being disturbed, you're being interrupted, it basically takes 20 minutes, between 15 and 20 minutes to get you back in that concentration level that you had before, right? So again, every switch of context is like kind of breaking your flow, and it will take you time. That hour is gonna, remember we have 1 hour to code, it's gonna pass pretty fast. Okay, so the idea is we have our IDE, and there we have all the tools that we actually need to do our job. We have the tools to develop. Here, this is a screenshot of our micro-integrator, the VS Code plugin. I can do low code, as you can see on the left. If this is what I want. I can use co-pilots to actually help me in terms of my productivity to understand what the tool is actually doing and help me code that integration, which is here on the left. So stay in there, okay? That's very important. The other thing where people are losing developers are losing a lot of time is finding things that they can actually reuse, right? So I've worked with countless customers that have tried to actually create a reusable customer service, right? But then it's so difficult to find in terms of and reuse or extend, etc., that everybody is starting to re-implementing their own customer service. So there is zero reuse, right? That's one of the reasons, for example, we have a marketplace and we're putting tools in there to actually help developers find, hey, I'm trying to do this. Is there anything already existing within the enterprise that will actually help me to go faster, to be more productive, and do reusability across the board, right? So we want to make that also cycle of coding, deploy, test as frictionless as possible. Back to my original story, that was not the case at all. Like if every time I'm making a change and I want to deploy in dev to actually try it for real, it takes 58 steps and hours, that is not frictionless, right? We want this to be as agile and easy as possible. So, I commit my code, I just push it, and some magic happens, and minutes later, my new code is somewhere ready for me to test and work with, right? So that's very important. And this is where we get into the notion of GitOps, right? Which is to describe everything as code. This is kind of an extension, if you want, of infrastructure as code. The idea is, as a developer, basically, again, I should only have to worry about describing, give me minimal information of what the app actually is, and then push it, commit the code, and then something will take that code, an agent will take that code, will start deploying it, promoting it when I want across different environments, and do all those things like doing scanning, all those things that the company wants in terms of validation across the board will happen transparently behind the scenes, and as a developer, I don't have to really worry about any of that. As an example, something like this is actually something I took from the open source choreo that we announced yesterday, where I can actually describe in YAML what is my app, what does it do, what does it run, and that's all I have to say, right? I'm going to take that, I'm going to push it, put it in my Git repo together with my app, and that's all I have to do. Behind the scene, it's going to deploy everything for me, right? And one concept here is this platform as an API, right? So ideally, from a developer point of view, we have created a platform which is something that does all the hard work for us, which really a developer only has to consume as an API. It could be through a CLI, as I mentioned here. It could be like a curl call. Doesn't really matter. But all I have to know is an interface to this, so I can actually ask the platform to do something for me. That's all I need to say, right? And then once I describe it and I push my code, then everything else, like the dependencies installation, maybe a database, whatever it is, will be automatically set up for me transparently behind the scenes. And then, well, as much as we all would like to write code that doesn't have any bugs, that doesn't happen. Well, unless there's somebody here who's never written code without a single bug. One person just said yes. Okay, very great, good for you. So debugging is really where we're spending most of our time. It's not so much about writing the code, it's a lot of help and everything. We can do this pretty easily. But debugging and understanding is actually we spend a lot of time in that. Now, in distributed architectures, if you look at that picture here, this is again something from Choreo that shows you like the relationships between the different components of your application. I may have written 2 of those, and somebody else has written 3 of those, and somebody else has written 4 of those, right? So it's not my code. We only agreed on interfaces again. So if I have to debug that, that entire flow, it's going to be complicated unless I have the right tools to actually do it, right? Which allows, for example, me to say, just show me the data for that specific microservice. So let's put it in observation mode so I can see only the logs and only what that specific component is actually doing when we are running a full transaction. Right, so understanding that whole flow is really critical. So that means that from a developer perspective, we need to make sure we give them access to this, right? So if they have to search for hours on how to get to the logs, which I've seen happen also in a lot of customers, it's like, you have to debug this. Well, I need the logs, and you can't have them. Well, that's not going to make my life easy, right? So getting access to the logs, maybe that code, that's why I have this code explanation here, that code is not even mine. Somebody left. They left that code in here, and now I'm the new person who has to maintain that code. So being able to understand what it does very quickly is another way to enhance my productivity, right? And yeah, so anybody here from Madrid? Few people recognize that street? You know where that is? Okay, that's Calle Velázquez. All right, so in Madrid, we have 2 big avenues, Velázquez and Serrano, right? Same avenue. One, for some reason, when you take your car and you go through it, all the traffic lights are synchronized. It's fantastic. If you start and you respect the limits in terms of speed, you will just go from one point to the next like a breeze, okay? The other one, for some reason, is terrible. It's like you do 20 meters, you get stopped at the traffic light. You get another 20 meters, you get stopped at the traffic light, right? So it really doesn't help it's very frustrating. So my image here is about when we're creating a CI/CD and a pipeline and we have steps in there. Remember my 58 number, right? Think about what you're going to put there in terms of how it's going to impact the productivity of your developers. Okay, some of the tools you're going to put in there, maybe it takes 1 hour to do code analysis. And that is, maybe not something you want to do at every single commit, for example. It's something you want to reserve for promotion across different environments, but not for every time somebody wants to deploy in dev. So again, the time it takes to go through the road, right, to go through the pipeline is something to take in consideration because it is going to impact very much the productivity of your developers, okay? Now, you have to measure and you have to improve. This is all great. You're going to put this in place. Now, this is all about also a conversation, right? In my description, I think, of the session, I talked about empathy. The main thing to do really is to sit down with the developers and ask them what is going on and what is wrong, which is really what happened on that meeting. By the way, going back to my original POC, what happened after all this story about token validation is they finally got together to think about, hey, how can we enhance this? Like I feel for you now. I feel that you have to go through 58 steps. I feel to you that you have to open tickets. How can we do this better? And gradually they went and make that much better now. I'm afraid I don't have any more contacts with them, so I don't know what the status is. But they got together and they talked about it and they did something about it. So the empathy and talking and understanding where your developer is standing and where are the problems is very important, but also you need to go back and measure automatically. Like if it takes a month between dev drops, right, and deployments, it shouldn't, right? You probably don't want to do that. So you need to have some alerts on what is going on. Why are we deploying only 1 time a month instead of maybe doing 1 time a week? I was looking at a presentation from Spotify the other day where they've automated this so much that they do thousands of microservices deployment every day. Right? I'm not saying you guys need that, but it's possible. Like once you have streamlined an entire flow, They just can't do this very, very quickly. They're extremely reactive now. So that's basically where you want to go step by step, find what your problems are. And hopefully if you do that, the next meeting you go with your developers, will be different from the one we went to on the first day. Everybody will be happy to work. Remember, this is also a retention thing. Developers need to be happy. Otherwise, they're going to go and find another place where they will be happy. So it's not only about making their life easier, it's also about making sure that you retain them and they stay within your company and they don't rotate. Thank you very much for your attention. Happy to be here. And there's a couple of sessions I've hinted here at Choreo. There's a couple of sessions this afternoon, one from Bioetician. If you want to go and see what we've done with the platform like the one I described, then please join those sessions. We'll be happy to help you there. Thank you very much.